Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Carl Block. Carl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb & Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Block and Tackle Show. Today, I have a very, very special guest, and I know I say that, but this person, even though I only have good people on my podcasts, Michael Flood is one of the most decent, kind, caring human beings I have ever met. And I'm really excited to have him. He is the president and CEO of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank, which is one of the largest food banks in the United States. And we're going to unpack today what you need to know about Michael, what you should know about the food bank, and the hundreds of thousands of lives that are touched by what they do. And with that, we're going to get right into it. So, Michael, welcome to the Block and Tackle Show.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me, Carl.
My pleasure. So, Michael, you've been with the food bank in Los Angeles for a minute, and we're obviously going to talk about that. But why don't you tell us about your journey before you got into food?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from Los Angeles. I was born here. My parents immigrated from Ireland with my brother, and they came to LA, and this is where I was born. And I grew up here in LA and also on the East Coast, just because of work for my father and the like. I ended up going to a school in Virginia, William and Mary, for college, and also played soccer there, and had a very brief professional soccer career after playing at William and Mary and going to school there. I worked in the newspaper business a little bit, financial world. I have an MBA, and decided in the early 1990s to go kind of the nonprofit route at that point, and worked for a couple of different food banks up in the San Francisco Bay Area before returning to Los Angeles in 2000 for this role. My predecessor, who you remember, Carl, from the 90s, Doris Block, retired, and I was really happy to return to Los Angeles for this role at the LA Regional Food Bank.
I don't usually come across people in the nonprofit world who were professional athletes and also have MBAs. So that's kind of an interesting story. Of course, where I grew up, I come across a lot of Irish people. So that's nothing new for me. And Doris is no relation, but yeah, I do recall her, and a very good human being, and did a good job with the food bank. So you come to LA and the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank in 2000. What was the size of the food bank back then? What was it like coming in there?
Well, food banks got going here in the United States in the late 60s and early 70s. The LA Regional Food Bank is one of the first food banks that was established, but wasn't even called a food bank in the beginning. A gentleman by the name of Tony Collier started picking up food in his pickup truck in the Pasadena area. That's how many of the food banks around the country got going in the beginning, with no grand plans of what it would turn into. Just that, there's wholesome food being thrown away. People are hungry. So how do we put those two things together? So by the time I came into the food bank in 2000, it had relocated to South Los Angeles, right off Alameda and 41st, just a mile or two south of the 10, and the food bank was just expanding into a couple buildings next to its main site there on East 41st Street. Which we're going to talk about what the food bank does, but kind of having a warehouse facility is very important to the work of what we do. So that expanded the space there in South LA to about 96,000 square feet, which is good size space, very helpful for, at that time, the food bank was distributing I'd say about 32 million pounds of food.
So, okay, and if I'm not mistaken, and let's just talk about what kind of food you were distributing back in 2000 when you first got there. I believe uh, you could get sodas through the food bank back then, and a lot of rice and beans, and but not and a lot more processed foods back then than today. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, in the beginning years, early years of the food bank world, it was what was kind of surplus out there and available. And, I'd say in the early 2000s here in Los Angeles, the LA Regional Food Bank, as we looked at the overall needs of the community, we realized that didn't really make a lot of sense. Again, rice, pinto beans, other items are staple food items, very important. But we started rating the nutritional content of the food coming in. So by doing that, the items, the sugary items and other items that really aren't that good for you. And really, when we ask people what they're looking for, it's not what they're asking for. They're asking for, staple, nutritious food items. And that led to a real shift and a shift in operations. It led to a lot of change for the food bank and also our partner organizations, agencies who we distribute food to. But you're right. Back in 2000, it was more shelf-stable items, not as much perishable, some frozen. That was the state of affairs back at that time.
Okay, and we're going to talk in greater detail about the logistics and the food types and the needs that you had to deal through, because really, we'll get through this. This is not a plug and play organization. It takes a lot of thought, a lot of investigation, a lot of implementation, fundraising to do what you did to make this transformation. But before we go there, so I don't think a lot of people realize how prevalent the hunger issue is in Los Angeles County and the nation, by the way, and what food insecurity is really all about. So why don't you tell people what food insecurity is and how prevalent the problem is here in Los Angeles County?
Food insecurity is a measurement that the federal government developed in the mid 1990s to determine how many people need help with food across the United States. So there's a national survey done by USDA and the census, and then local groups, organizations, universities also take that survey and have applied it. Run kind of the county of Los Angeles has done this in the past. And most recently, USC has been releasing through the Dornsife School an annual food insecurity report for Los Angeles County. Food insecurity itself, basically what these questions are trying to ascertain is the household, whether it's an individual or a family unit, making sort of sacrifices, financial sacrifices to feed themselves. For example, rent is something everyone needs to pay for obvious reasons, and other basic expenses are really non-negotiable. So in a food insecure household, whatever is left over in the budget for food is not sufficient to meet the needs of everyone in that household. So what ends up happening is parents forego eating so their kids can eat. That's where, again, going more towards less expensive items just to try to stretch the budget as much as possible. A lot of coping mechanisms come into play. And, besides the issue of just around hunger and people experiencing hunger, it's not healthy for you, right? In terms of having, sort of a little bit of a feast and famine type of situation. and having this occur sort of month after month for those people who are struggling to meet all their food needs. So that's really at its core what food insecurity is. And when the pandemic hit, USC released its first local report of food insecurity, and it found 1/3 of households in Los Angeles County were struggling with food insecurity to meet their food needs. One other thing I do want to mention about food insecurity, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going hungry every day. It may mean there's sort of variations of how severe the food insecurity situation is for an individual or a family. But it is a measurable shortfall of food. Could be a few days a month or something to that extent. So, as we remember in the pandemic, the unemployment rate locally went up to more than 20% with parts of the economy closing down. So I suppose it wasn't that surprising that the food insecurity rate went up that high. But still, when you think about it, we have 10 million people live in Los Angeles County. That's a lot of people. That's a lot
Yeah,
of households.
so to think, and again, just to be clear, assuming that the USC study is accurate and it's 1/3 of the county, then that means 3,300,000 people in Los Angeles are food insecure.
That is sort of job one for the LA Regional Food Bank and the partner agencies we're serving. During that pandemic year, our food distribution went up by 145% in a matter of weeks because of what was going on with the demand. Now, one thing that was helpful for us, because we rely on donated food primarily, is that there was a lot of food left over during that time, right? Because you remember restaurants were closing down, conventions and the like. So there were huge gluts of produce and dairy and meat and other items that were available. And I do give the USDA credit for stepping in very quickly and providing some funding so that food could get captured and distributed through food banks through a program that was only kind of running for about 2 years. It wasn't meant to be a permanent program. It was a temporary program. So that was very helpful for us and food banks around the country to take that surplus food and get it to people who needed it.
Okay. And I actually want to unpack that too. But the problem of food insecurity seems to have risen in the pandemic, but also even now. What do you think the big driver of the food insecurity issues is today?
I think there are two big drivers. One, we had prior to the pandemic, and that's our very high cost of living here in the Los Angeles area, which is driven primarily by housing and rents. When you look at the statistics of the percentage of households that are considered rent burden, meaning they're putting a disproportionate share of their income to keep that roof over their heads. The pandemic issue, I would say, initially were people losing their jobs, being furloughed and the like. But as employment has come back, the bigger impact has been inflation. So food prices are about 25% higher than they were prior to the pandemic. And that's just food prices, right? We know fuel and other items have also increased during that time. So I think for us here in the Los Angeles County area, and that would extend throughout Southern California, I think the two biggest drivers really are that high cost of living, especially driven by housing, and that cumulative impact of inflation.
That makes sense. In terms of the people in Los Angeles who are facing these struggles, who are the faces of these people? What are the demographics of people that seem to be suffering the most from food insecurity?
Yes, and this I think is something that has changed, Carl, over the years. We're talking about kind of the food bank history and where we are today. It's you see, to get to that level of 30% food insecurity, it's not in one neighborhood, one area, one geographic area. It is spread throughout Los Angeles County. There, very few neighborhoods, I would say, that you wouldn't find some challenge with people dealing with food needs. I suppose some very affluent areas you wouldn't see it, but again, throughout LA, the county itself, it really is spread, and the data show that in terms of that spread. As far as ages, seniors living on fixed incomes, obviously with what we've been talking about, high cost of living, impact of inflation, working families, are in line. People who can't work for whatever reason, dealing with a disability, or maybe unemployed, or other reasons why they're not able to work. People who end up having medical conditions and issues, right? You have a lot of households struggling to meet their food needs. Obviously that is, as much as parents are going to try to shield that impact to their kids, it's impacting kids. Again, the data show that impact is there. So for us, organizationally, as we talk about programs, we want to focus on, and we do, sort of older adults, seniors, kids, families. Most of the people seeking food assistance do have a roof over their heads, but obviously homelessness situation is also a big issue throughout the Los Angeles area. So we have a lot of partners. That's what they're focusing on primarily, those who are unhoused. So it cuts across a wide variety of people as far as ages, geographic area throughout Los Angeles County, and for a variety of reasons.
And I think I'm very happy that you mentioned that, because for people who don't study hunger, they may think that it only applies to certain ethnic demographics or certain very small neighborhoods. But the truth is, from ethnicity to age to education level, hunger is very, very prevalent in Los Angeles, across the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back to that 2020 year where, again, unemployment jumped to 20, more than 20%. And we're holding a lot of these big drive-through distributions, at the Hollywood Bowl and the Forum and SoFi Stadium and, Santa Anita Park. I mean, all over the place, with a lot of partners, the county, city, school districts, other partner organizations, and also more recently, when the entertainment strikes were going on, doing some special distributions for that. People coming through, you would hear it in terms of, I was fine last week, right? Now I'm not fine, right? Sort of the world has been upended, right? In terms of everything was okay a week ago, 2 weeks ago, or a month ago. Now, my world is completely different.
I totally understand. And that's very well said. So, you've touched upon some of the logistics of this, and I don't think people have an appreciation of it. But instead of jumping into that right now, I want to sort of go from the ground up to talk about all the things you guys have had to do to actually change, expand, react, all that stuff from the very beginning all the way through the shocks that you've had to deal with. Because I think it's actually incredible when you talked about 32 million pounds of food, and we're going to get into how much more it is now, and then these life disruptions that are happening and how you adapt to that. And we really do need to unpack that. But first, let me take you back to something that you said. It was, a lot of non-perishables, a lot of processed foods, a lot of sugary stuff, to where we are today. So yeah, just briefly, tell us, like, the sort of gamut of foods you're distributing today, and how you were able to shift the direction of the food bank from the processed to the non-processed.
So, Carl, I mean, you've been in the food bank many times, but those who are listening or viewing this, you're welcome to come tour and take a look. It's a great thing to see firsthand. People are generally amazed of kind of the overall scale of the operation. Fresh produce is our number one food category these days. So a lot of, and again, we're fortunate to be in California. where there's a lot of produce grown. So that's very helpful for us. Any frozen fish, frozen meat, frozen fruits, frozen vegetables. Certainly a big part of what we do, and we still have, of course, shelf stable, rice and pinto beans and pastas, and those types of items are also in high demand. Nuts and dry fruits. I'd say the biggest change has been we've had to increase our refrigeration capacity, because coming in for me in 2000, very small cold box, right? As you were kind of describing, wasn't a big focus area for the food bank at that time. So, through the years at our South LA facility, the food bank, being a nonprofit organization, has run a number of campaigns, expansion, capital campaigns, equipment, just things to be able to increase our capacity. So that's been consistent through the years as we've continued to grow. And then also, ensuring all of the vehicles, because we're picking this food up, right? Donors call, we're picking it up. And given that it's shifted so heavily to refrigerated and frozen food, all our vehicles need to be refrigerated, right? So that has been another big change over the years. We've also, I mentioned we had to go off into a lease situation because of just growth over the years, especially going back to the Great Recession. And that put us on a path of looking for a larger facility, just to kind of somehow leapfrog ahead of what we saw as future growth and needs. This was before the pandemic, so facility committee of the board of directors and getting the right professionals involved to be able to kind of locate a facility, and we found it. And that's actually where I'm talking to you from today. It's in the City of Industry. I mentioned the South LA buildings are about 96,000 square feet. This facility is 255,000 square feet on about 12 acres. So that you kind of mentioned, we wanted to jump ahead, right, to be able to, not keep running up against capacity issues and the like. And this facility has done that for us. It has about 45,000 square feet of cold storage space. I mean, huge amount of cold storage space.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is. So that has been very important for us. I think the pandemic, just in a strange way helped us a little bit. And I think that put us in a position to quickly, bid for this building and beat out other potential buyers and acquire the building. So that's the kind of capacity increase that we've needed to do. And we've also been increasing the capacity of our agency partners, because again, refrigerated vans and trucks, refrigeration on site for them, and other capacity aspects have been important as we all have grown and want to meet the needs of the people we're serving.
So, Michael, as you're talking about some of the stuff, the expansion and what you did, I'm not sure people really understand the day-to-day, how incredible it is to go from the kind of food that was largely non-perishable and not necessarily healthy to a largely fresh fruits and vegetables, more frozen good stuff, and then thinking through all the logistics of what it means, how to get that food, how to source it, how to store it, and how to get it out. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, first, it's important to understand what the needs of the people we're serving, right? So in asking people what they're looking for, fresh produce came up as a big part of this. So then it's looking at the different sources of food. So we have a team that focuses on the food donors. And, we tend to focus locally, working with other food banks in growing regions. We have a state association of food banks, allows us to access a lot of that fresh food. And then operationally, that whole part of pivoting around on-site refrigeration, the food banks, trucking, making that fleet, which was largely not refrigerated before, pretty much all refrigerated today. And then the agency partners too, in increasing capacity there. So there's a lot of steps involved, and it didn't happen overnight. It's sort of one of those things where through a planning process, you set goals and evaluate, and then look at it again and see what more can be done. And it's that sort of process that has led to what we feel like are pretty good results.
And by the way, I think you're being humble about that, which is, I mean, you're just a stand-up guy. But so you've mentioned the partner agencies, and for those people who aren't really super familiar with a food bank, so you've gone from having to have a lot less refrigeration and a lot more refrigeration, and rice and beans have a very long shelf life. You don't have to get them out as quickly or as rapidly in deliveries as you do with perishables. So you have to think through all that conversion. But the food bank doesn't just distribute these millions of pounds, spoiler alert, we're going to get to how many that is in a minute, to the individual people who are hungry. You have these partner agencies, and why don't you just talk a second about how the partner agencies are a big part of your distribution network?
Sure. Yeah. So these are, again, the LA Regional Food Bank. We're a nonprofit charitable organization, and the partner agencies are also largely charitable organizations. We're not a faith-based organization. Through just our founding and history, about half the organizations that we serve are faith-based in some fashion. And our only ask is that they serve everyone who comes to their door. And that anyone who needs food assistance gets that help. So these are organizations that you probably would have heard of: Boys and Girls Clubs, Salvation Army, other organizations like that. And then smaller, like food pantries, who are kind of a one organization, in a local community, providing help to people in that area. So that is where 85% of our food goes to, of this partner agency network, serving people in their local community. It does also include soup kitchens and shelters, organizations focusing on veterans. Some have a specific focus on age, some are focusing more on seniors, some more on youth and children. So the bulk of this food is going to these other organizations doing great work in their local community, and often providing more services than just food. Some are co-located with other essential services for people coming and getting that help. So it's a great network. Some of these organizations we've been working with for over 40 years, long-time partnerships, and we're adding agencies all the time. Because these are largely voluntary organizations that also are relying on financial contributions, volunteers, and other support to help them do their work.
Okay, so let me ask you, how many partner organizations do you have right now?
We have 600 spread throughout Los Angeles County. Some of those have more than one distribution site. Mm-hmm. In just how they're structured and the like, and so that is that's where we are currently. That number grew during the pandemic. Interestingly, there were a lot of existing nonprofits that saw needs so great that even though food wasn't their primary mission, they contacted us. We added over about 100 partner agencies during 2020 and 2021. And a lot of those organizations kind of went back to their core mission as things settled down a little bit. But that was also very helpful in those pandemic years of getting more food to people who needed it.
Got it. So in that regard, you've got this large facility, and we're going to get to that too. And Los Angeles County is very big. So you've got trucks going, 30, 40 miles sometimes, maybe more. You're traversing this great area.
Well, yeah, I mean, Antelope Valley is part of Los Angeles County, right? Palmdale, Lancaster. And so, yeah, I mean, the trucks are covering a lot of ground. It's a 6-day a week operation and a typical week, Monday through Saturday, both in terms of picking up donated food from donors, from food sources, and doing a lot of also delivery and distribution. The agency network I mentioned largely come to one of our locations, the Industry or South LA facility, to pick up, but we also do delivery out to some of the agencies. We started delivery out in actually Antelope Valley because it's the most remote part of Los Angeles County. So that's kind of the logistics of what happens every day.
Understood. Thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.